Good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back from Talk Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I take my first pass at the Commander for us on a budget on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. That deck list is going to be down in the description for you below, as well as I'd really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. I'd appreciate it. But today we're rolling through our first week of Spider-Man content. We're looking at all the transforming double-face commanders today, and today we're looking at Miles Morales and Ultimate Spider-Man. A Naya colored identity transforming double face card. What that means is that you can either cast this card from Miles on the front side and then pay 6 mana to flip him into Ultimate Spider-Man, or at any time you could cast him, you could also pay the cost to bring him in as the backside is Ultimate Spider-Man. Miles on the front side, 2 mana come in, put a counter on up to 2 creatures, and then for 6 mana you flip over to the Ultimate Spider-Man, first strike and haste. You can pay 2 mana to put a counter on Ultimate Spider-Man to get hexproof and becomes colorless. It's a very interesting ability. The thing to note about that ability is it's going to be really a good way to protect Ultimate Spider-Man if you're worried about it. There's also a few interesting rules interactions with becoming colorless, so that's kind of interesting. We're not going to talk about that or really care about that too much, but it's important to note that him being colorless could be a pretty big deal if you're facing off against certain types of archetypes. And then whenever you attack, you just double the number of each kind of counter on each spider and legend you control. And that is where our deck's going to try to have some fun. There's been so many great pieces of counter sport over the last couple sets, and that's what we're going to try to take advantage of. Fill our deck with spiders and legends that we can double the number of counters on and just take over the game. Naya is one of the best colors when it comes to counters. There's so many great pieces we have, and that's the game plan. I just want to give a quick caveat that we are in the middle of pre-orders for Spider-Man, so a lot of the prices are kind of out of whack. You're going to see that number down there is a lot higher than normal for Millsy Brews, and that's just because I think a lot of these pre-order prices are way higher than they're probably going to be. So if you're seeing this down the line, check the links in the description for the deck lists. You're going to see a better accurate, amalgamation of the price, whereas for this kind of week or two pre-release, we're going to kind of have a weird cost for some of these cards, and you'll see it as we go through our slides. But I want to say a quick thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of my videos just a little bit earlier for just $1 a month, consider checking that down below to support the channel. Well, okay. I always kind of break my counters deck into 2 pieces. How to put counters on things and how to make counters matter. And the reason I always make that distinction in my head is there can be cards that do both, right? But you want to see both. You want to see cards that put counters on, and you want to see cards that care about counters. You'll note that Ultimate Spider-Man is a card that cares about counters, right? He doubles the number of counters. So we need to find ways to put counters on, right? So that he and a lot of other cards in our deck can care about those counters that are on things. And in our color combination, we have a lot of interesting ways to do this. Aragorn gives all of our attacking creatures first strike of renown 1. So whenever a creature that's renowned hits a player, if it isn't renowned, it becomes... If a creature has renown 1 and it hits a player, if it's not renowned, it becomes renowned and gets a counter on it. And then Aragorn basically says, whenever your renowned creatures hit a player, you're just going to double the number of counters on it. So Aragorn gives an option for a counter to be put on a creature, and it actually helps double them. Arwen just says, hey, every creature that comes into your control is going to come with counters on it equal to its toughness. And of course, more counters on Arwen, right, means more counters that go on the things you come in. Burke isn't really a card I've played a ton, and a lot of these more counters brews that I've been doing lately, but I really wanted to try it out. I love the art, and I think Burke's a ton of fun. 6 mana 4/4 comes in, put a counter on each up to 2 creatures. Notably, right, these are all legends. That's the important part, right, for Miles' backside's ability, for Ultimate's ability. Whenever a creature we control the counter on attacks, double the number of counters on it. Whew. So now we could potentially quadruple the counters, right, between Ultimate Spider-Man and Burke. And you could start to see where this could get kind of fun as you mix these abilities together. Halan and Elena, at the start of combat in your turn, hands out counters onto a creature where excess Halan and Elena's power, and then that creature gets haste. A really nice ability, because it can give haste to some key creatures at the right time. Master Seymour, start of combat in your turn, you put a number of counters on a creature equal to Master Seymour's power. So again, can start kind of passing these counters out. You're going to see something very similar with Ouroboros to the right of it. But Seymour can become monstrous, where X number of counters among creatures you control with this, which is a potentially very dangerous ability depending on what state of the game you're in. But I think Ouroboros is just the better card, and it's pretty scary to watch Ouroboros go off. At the beginning of your turn, you just put X counters on each creature you control, where X is Ouroboros' power. So if it's 5, you're putting 5 counters on all your creatures. And note, Ouroboros' ability goes off before you attack. This is the beginning of combat, meaning that then any of your other combat abilities like Miles can go off and double them, right? So you could start to see where, like, if mixing some of these abilities together can really get out of hand quickly if you could protect your board. Sovereign Akaneka House says whenever it attacks, for each creature you control whose power is greater than their base power, so anything affecting their power, you're going to put counters on it equal to the difference. Most of the time in counter stack, this is just going to double the number of counters on the creature. But it's important to note that if you're playing things that like straight buff your creatures or something like that, you can end up putting more on them than that. But otherwise, you're just doubling the counters. The regular version, the mono green version of Miles, it just says whenever it enters their attack, you just put a counter on each creature you control, and then they get trampled. That is huge. The trample on this ability is massive because a lot of times what happens in counter stack is you're going to load your creatures up with counters, but people can just chump block it, make a bunch of 1/1s, they throw their creatures in the way, and then you have a really tough time connecting. What I really like about Miles here is that not only is it a great body with vigilance and trample, but it gives all your creatures trample, meaning they can hopefully hit really hard. Andoril says whenever the equipped creature attacks, you're going to spread a counter to each creature you control. But if you can manage to get the City's Blessing with the Ascend mechanic, then you get 2 counters instead. And now you're really starting to ramp up, right, how great your board's going to look. There's more ways to put counters onto the deck, but I think you can start to see, okay, so I have pieces in my deck that are going to put counters on my creatures. How do we pay it off? How do we finish the game? Well, we want to put a ton of things in that care about counters being on creatures or having counters on themselves. And there's a lot of ways you can do this. And I just tried to pick a nice spattering across the board of these abilities. First off, something like Abs and Falconer. You have these creatures that say every creature you control that has a counter on it has blank. Falconer gives out flying. And flying, in some senses, is just as good as trample, depending on what opponents you're playing, right? If none of your opponents have flyers, flying is probably better than trample. But if your opponents have flyers, then trample might be more worth it, right? But flying is a huge ability. It almost always is beneficial for us, and it's something we want to see on our board. A Nimbicall is an example of a creature that cares about having counters on itself. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, so a Nimbicall doesn't even have to attack. You just have to attack with a Nimbicall on the battlefield. She gets a counter, and then you make a X 1/1 gnomes tapped and attacking, where X is the number of counters on her. So the more a Nimbicall counters, the more gnomes you're getting that come in tapped and attacking, and I can hit your opponents. Schlein Halar is one of those cards that's going to be a danger when you put it out alongside Ultimate Spider-Man, because whenever you put one or more counters on a creature you control, it deals that much damage to target opponent. So as Miles is doubling up, right, the number of counters on your creatures, Schlein is just going to start pinging out damage. And we have another copy of this card we'll talk about in a second in the deck. So we have 2 of these that both, I think, can pair really well with Miles or Ultimate Spider-Man, as Ultimate Spider-Man starts to double the number of counters that are on your creatures. Thundering Raiju, whenever it attacks, you put a counter on a creature, then it deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of modified creatures you control other than Thundering Raiju. So modified, remember, means equipped, enchanted, or counters on it. And, well, our whole deck cares about counters being on it, right? So Thundering Raiju is going to have hopefully some great damage to hit to our opponents. Damning Verdict destroys all creatures with no counters on them. Hopefully that's all of our opponents' creatures and none of ours, right? As we try to take advantage of this one-sided board wipe. Synchronized Charge. We can distribute 2 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures we control. So we can either put 2 on 1 or 1 on 2, right? And then all of our creatures with counters on them get Vigilance and Trample. This is a huge Alpha Strike card, especially the bigger your board gets, because at a certain point in a lot of counter decks, you no longer care about doubling your creature's power to some extent. You're going to have obligatorily large creatures. You really just need trample, or you need some way to push your damage through. And what I like about Synchronized Charge is not only do you get the trample, but you also get vigilance, meaning you can sit back and block, right? You have more ways to protect yourself. And then you have Harmonize to cast it back out of your graveyard again. And the way Harmonize works is you can actually tap a creature to help reduce the cost, where X is its power. Meaning that if you have a cheaper creature that's 4 power, you could tap it and then just get Synchronized Charge back out of your graveyard for 1 green. And you get to do this again. Take another huge attack at your opponents with all your creatures. And remember, this is before the Ultimate Spider-Man or the other effects that you have to put more counters and double them. The important thing to note is that in order to take advantage of synchronized charges, vigilance, and trample, those creatures have to have counters on them when you cast the spell. Like you can't use like Miles Morales to put counters on all your creatures when it goes to attack and then them get vigilance or trample. It's right. It's only the creatures that are on board when you cast it. Inspiring Call. Draw a card for each counter. Each creature you control the counter on it, and they all get indestructible. OB1 is the second copy of Shalai and Halar. The only difference between OB1 and Shalai and Halar is that Shalai is target opponent. OB1 is target opponent, creature opponent controls, or planeswalker opponent controls. So you can actually start picking off creatures instead of players if you want to. I can't think of really many scenarios where you'd want to start picking off creatures instead of players, especially when you're leveraging these creatures with a lot of counters on them, but there may come that time where you can't attack a player, but you need to get rid of their planeswalker, or you need to get rid of their creature, and all B1 can do that. Branching Evolution, doubling the amount of counters that we put on our things instead, a great ability, and we're playing a couple of these styles abilities in the deck. Invigorating Hot Spring gives all of our creatures with counters on them haste. All modified creatures we control have haste. And Hot Springs is a really interesting ability. So it comes in with 4 counters on it, and once per turn, you can move a counter from it to a creature, effectively giving them haste at sorcery speed. A really nice card. It's great just on its own to give all your modified creatures haste, but of course, handing out that haste is really useful. Sphere Grid, whenever a creature we control hits a player, it gets a counter, but notably, all of our creatures with counters on them have Reach and Trample. So again, here's Trample coming back in again. Great for us. Reach is really nice if you're playing against somebody who has flying and you don't really have any ways to get flying. Reach means that you may be able to just shut them down, taking you out, right? Uncivil Unrest, another key card you're going to see in these counter matters decks in red. All your non-token creatures get riots. The way riot works is, you'll also see this on a card like Rhythm of the Wild. I didn't show it here, but Rhythm of the Wild's in the deck. The creature gets your choice of a counter or haste when it enters. So if you have a great way to put counters on it, maybe you pick haste instead. Otherwise, a counter is always great. And then whenever a creature we control the counter on it would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage. Big thing to note about this ability is this does not say combat damage. So that means that if a creature's ability were to deal damage, it's doubled as long as there's counter on it. But, most of the time, right, you're going to really take advantage of that in combat, right, as you're swinging towards your opponents. There's always going to be cards in your deck, especially in a counters deck, that aren't going to fall into either of those two categories. And in this deck, we have a couple interesting pieces that this set has added. Radioactive Spider's a new card that I think is going to be really useful in these new Spider-Man decks. So for 2 mana, you can sack it to go get any spider hero and put it into your hand. So if you think about it, Ultimate Spider-Man's in the command zone. So we can't go get it, but Miles is a great one. You also have a couple other spiders in the deck you could go get. So if you see Radioactive Spider early, right, you can go get, something like Miles. Tifa is one of those cards that I think works really great in a deck like this because all your creatures are going to get huge. So Tifa says, whenever one or more creatures you control with power 7 or greater deal combat damage to a player, you get to untap all your creatures, and if it's the first combat of our turn, we get an additional combat. This is a very odd text box, but I'll try to break it down for you. So if a creature with power 7 or greater would hit a player in combat, untap all creatures you control. So that's an interesting ability. You can potentially untap your creatures more than once, right? But the goal of the ability is this. We want to attack each of our opponents with a creature's power 7 or greater so that if they hit, we can get up to 3 additional combats. And then the hope is that we can continue to run damage into our opponents, right? Dealing more damage to them and hitting even harder. She has melee, so as long as we're attacking all 3 of our opponents, she can count for one of our 7s. But it's just a way to add some sneaky value in potentially getting multiple combats. Now, the Sarima just came out in Edge of Eternities. When it comes in, we get to search our library for a legend, reveal it, put it into our hand, and then shuffle. Well, that's great. There's a lot of great legends in our deck, as Ultimate Spider-Man really cares about legends. So, yeah, we have a ton of them in the deck, and Sarima is great for it. But the other great thing that Sarima adds is if we station it up, whenever we go to attack, right, or our legends are tapped, they have indestructible, making them a little bit harder to get rid of. Single target removal like Plowshares and Path to Exile will still work, but you kind of protect yourself out from some of the cheap, easy board wipes, right? And so the Sarima can be really useful for that. Kind of a nombo if we have Vigilance, but again, Sarima, I think just at its search alone is worth it. And then note that if you station this up, it's a legendary creature, and it can then get counters from Ultimate Spider-Man, right? And he joins up, says whenever a triggered ability of a legend we control would trigger, it goes off an additional time. There are so many legends in this deck, and he joins up is going to be able to double up all of them, including Ultimate Spider-Man. Garrick's Uprising, basically just there to hand out trample, but if we have bigger creatures come in, we do get to draw. That's not the point of Garrick's Uprising. To me, Garrick's Uprising is there to give your board trample, and it's well worth the mana for it. If you have a bunch of 12/12s that have all these counters, you have all these 4/4s that have a ton of counters on them, and they're huge, and the only thing you're missing is trample, I think 3 mana is well worth the cost to pay, right, to get trample and make it happen. And then Windcrag Siege, I think most of the time you're going to use it for its Mardu side. If a creature attacking causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, it goes off additional time. This is mainly there for Ultimate Spider-Man, right? Our commander, the point of our deck. But remember, we talked about legends like Sovereign Akadeka How, right? That hands out counters when it attacks. So you could start to see where Windcrag Siege can be more than just double up Ultimate Spider-Man's ability. It could be a really key piece for us. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my first shot at Miles, and I think going into testing, just like in any counters decks, you want to kind of start with your first draft on paper and figure out, do I have enough ways to get counters on all my things? And then what you have to determine is, do I need to try to care about having counters on them more, right? I'll say in my experience building counters decks, more often than not, you have enough ways to get counters on your creatures. What you tend to lack is enough ways to pay them off, but you won't know that until you play a few games. And so the cards to consider here are basically just going to be things that care about creatures with counters on them. Dustshell Crawler hands out Trample. Battle Priest hands out Lifelink. Chocobo Knight gives Double Strike to creatures that attack with counters on them. So you could start to see like the benefit of some of these types of cards. Again, adding more of these combat abilities to your creatures, right? As you're attacking and trying to, deal damage. I will say, you may end up preferring certain abilities over other. Personally, in my counter decks, I prefer Trample over just about anything else, because what tends to happen, especially if you have things like Ouroboros or Andoril or Sovereign Akadeka How, and they get going, you're going to have 15, 18, 20 power creatures, and it feels bad to run a 20/20 into somebody and just have it chump blocked, and then you're not dealing any damage. But Trample will inevitably help you win games, which is why I value things like Garrick's Uprising and Dustshell Crawler, and even Tuskguard Captain, which is one of the other creatures that say, creatures you control with counters on them have Trample. Like, those I value a little bit more. Same thing with something like Falconer, right? Giving up flying. But I think you'll find your own value of what you like the most. There are multiple creatures like Battle Priest that give out lifelink if that's something you want to do. If you think about it, that's equally as beneficial if you get chump blocked. If I have an 18/18 that gets chump blocked by a 2/2, I'm netting 18 life, and that might almost be just as useful if you think about it, right? Because then even though I'm getting chump blocked, I'm netting 20, 30, 40 life of combat. And now I don't care about people swinging back at me unless it's commander damage, because that gap is just going to open up too wide, right, for your opponents to deal with. But let's do what we love to do on the channel the most and get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of playtest on our channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not just to show off all our best plays, but it's get in some gameplay scenarios and kind of walk ourselves through what hands we look at to keep, and how are we going to set our things up. So here in the first one, we're keeping a 3-lander. Note, we do have that Cultivate. We do have the Hot Spring, and we see All-Be-One and Ouroboros. This is a really great hand. I mean, really all we need is, one more land, so we don't have to completely rely on Cultivate. But, I mean, Cultivate would get us up to 5, so really all we need is one more land for Miles, and I think we're absolutely golden. We have a lot of the things we want to see. I was going to say, we have 2 lands that can tap for anything. This taps for all 3 of our colors. Plaza can tap for all 3 of our colors as long as it's used to either cast a legend or we have a legend permanent of that type. I think Plaza makes the most sense here on turn 2. Turn 3, I'm kind of thinking just going for Cultivate. We'll go get a white source just to even out. And then we do have a couple double red and double green. We have them in our hand. I'll just go put a plains into my hand. Cultivate's a really great ramp spell for that. We could have played Miles, but my thought was kind of waiting on Miles just to make sure that we can get some good value out. Here's Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary. When it comes in, you get a basic land, get to put it in tapped. Very interesting ability. I kind of like just leading with Ouroboros, getting it in and getting the party started. so we can start to get right more value down on the board. 6 mana here. Love the idea of something like Hot Spring. I could go like branching plus the front side of Miles, and I'd get to basically put um, 2 counters on, right? One on each of them. The important thing to note is when Miles transforms, it's not like an Exile where you exile and come back in. Miles just literally flips over. So if there's any counters on Miles, they get to retain themselves on Ultimate Spider-Man on the backside. I remember that branching is out, so it's actually the 1 counter for each of them will be 2. And so now we go to combat. Ouroboros going to try to put 4 counters on each of them, but it's going to be 8, right? Because of its ability, and now we're absolutely off to, or because of branching evolution, and now we're absolutely off to the races. In fact, our opponents might be in a ton of trouble depending on what we choose to do. I think all be one might make the most sense this turn, but I mean, you could also argue it's just turn Miles over and basically triple the number of counters that are on our permanents. If I all be one, I'm really not leaving much up to protect myself, but my thought process of all be one is each of them are getting what 24 counters, which means I could just probably nail somebody to the wall or nail 2 players to the wall and then try to get some damage through with these 2. If I flip Miles over, I'm leaving a little bit of that on the table, but that's my thought there. And now somebody has to get rid of Ouroboros if they haven't already. Now, if somebody gets rid of Ouroboros, that I would probably just go for flipping Miles and getting that set up. Your other option, I guess, could be something like Hot Springs plus, one of these guys, but to me, it doesn't make much sense. I guess there is the Hot Springs plus, you could try to hold up Inspiring Call, just try to protect your board. I guess there's a world where you could go like Ben Riley and then protect your board with the Inspiring Call, just trying to get more things out there, especially something with Trample on it. I could see that argument. My only problem with that is like I think we're clearly the threat at this point, and we need to try to end the game, which is why my thought is all we won hitting 2 players for 24 is going to really start bringing the game to an end. And then even if somebody gets rid of both of these, now we could come try to get these other pieces in, right, and kind of work our way back in, towards ending the game. Pretty quick start there, but I think that just shows you the power of Ouroboros. If it's not touched, it can just take over games. Playtest number 2 here. Keep it a 3-land with Twitching Doll. Twitching Doll is one of those really fun cards in this deck because it is a spider. You put nest counters on it when you tap it for mana, and then you could sack it to make a bunch of spider tokens where equal to the number of counters on it. And note that the nest counters and the plus and plus one counters would count separately, right? Meaning you could make a ton of you can make an absolute ton of spiders off its ability, which I think is really interesting. So turn 1 we'll do the canopy. Turn 2 get Twitching Doll in. Turn 3 I got 4 mana. There's Arwen. There's Ghost Spider, which could deal out some damage. There's the Rhythm of the Wild, right, giving out Riot. A lot of really interesting abilities. If I do this next turn, that's 5. Not enough for Miles' backside. Because, right, Ultimate's 6, right? I could go Arwen into, like, a Nakahow next turn. I'm trying to think of what makes the most sense. I almost want to say it's an Akahow just to get it in and get it going. Oh, Uncivil Unrest. That actually might take. I was going to say, I was thinking about just dumping in Arwen, but I almost feel like Uncivil Unrest makes the most sense. Akahow can attack. Unfortunately, it just doesn't get anything. And now this is the turn where I probably put Miles in on the backside. Right? It has haste, so it's going to attack this turn. I'll bring it in with a counter on it. Right? And then when it attacks, we're going to double each kind of counter on each spider and legend you control. So it's going to get this, and this is going to get some nest counters. And now this can get, it's a 6/5 first striker. Knockout just needs that 1 counter, but unfortunately we have ways to get it there. It's just going to be a minute or 2 probably before we can get it there. But the important thing to note is that would have could have doubled the counters there if we had done this ability first before Anaka House. Um, Toski, I absolutely love for the card draw. I'm thinking Rhythm plus Arwen. Have Arwen come in with a counter from Rhythm and haste from the Unrest, right? Just that way it can actually attack if we wanted to. Go to combat. Uh, have all three of them attack. We'll go basically double first with Miles, and then right double again with Akonek's ability, right? And then it won't, remember, Akonek won't touch the web counters, but I just realized that the nest counters will go up because of Spider-Man's ability. But again, this is great now because if I used twitching all that turn. But the important thing to note now about Arwen, and we're probably too late to make this really matter, but if I tap Twitching Doll and make a bunch of tutus with Arwen out, Arwen will put counters in all of them for her power, her toughness, which is very interesting and could get really out of hand. Um, Otherwise, I think we just need a way to get trample in. I mean, Toski can help us draw. We're now at the mana for something like Anti-Venom if we want to do that. Again, I like to see this, these things work. This is doubling damage if our things actually get through. And I think that playtest looks pretty good, right? In all, we would have loved to have seen something like Trample, but hey, you're not always going to see it. And it's important to see, if you don't see something like that, what your deck's going to do otherwise. Playtest number 3 here, keeping the 3-lander with Soul Ring. There's the Arwen, Rhythm of the Wild, and then Feldar Retreat. Notably about Feldar Retreat, whenever a land comes in, you can put a counter on each of your creatures, and they get Vigilance, which is a really interesting ability. There, my thought is getting the Soul Ring in. And get Arwen in. I was trying to think of what makes the most sense. Is it Halana? Is it like putting the Feldar Retreat and just getting the 2/2 Cat Beast? My only worry about that, my problem with that is then the Cat Beast will never get the counters, right? Kind of guess just like Arwen. It's a little awkward there because I'm not entirely sure what makes sense. What line in my head makes the most sense? Like here, I guess I don't mind just giving Arwen the counter, but that line doesn't feel right. Remember, Miles is 6. Or Ultimate 6. We could throw Miles in, I guess. I didn't think about that. I almost just like Halan and Elena. Comes in with a counter on it. It'll put 3 counters on Arwen, right? So now we're starting to really build up that. As we come to the next turn, again, we're 1 mana off of Ultimate Spider-Man, which is fine. We could all be 1 if we want to. Really thinking like Twitching plus Spider-Ham or something. I'm just trying to think of what's most I can get in this turn. Rhythm. Spider-Ham, give it haste, and then get the counters from that. Ham comes in with 4, right? That was my thought from Rhythm of the Wild, because now this comes in with, it could come in with another counter, right? Juan and Elena can give it 3 and give it haste, right? So now it basically can attack. And then we get the food counter off it coming in. And now we just have another great attacker that can get going. And then now, again, we're 1 mana off, so I think now we kind of have to put in Twitching Doll. We tried to give it time, but unfortunately, I think it's time to do it. If I give it haste, I can use it right away, right? Get the hot springs in. That'll put another counter on it because of that's the nest counter. And then I could just move the hot springs onto somebody. I mean, Hold on, in the hands, it's countered at somebody else. And again, we just get attacking. My thought is now we were just trying to find that mana for the backside of ultimate, right? And then ultimate comes in, it's coming in with 8 counters because of Arwen. Might as well put the counter on because of rhythm, because it already has haste because of the hot spring. And then Alana Leno could put the counters on it. Again, this could be a turn where you just sack Twitching Doll to get, 5 2/2s that are all going to come in as 10/10s that are, will all have haste because they have counters. And I'm like, this is where I think this Twitching Doll plus Arwen can be so interesting if you can get these counters on, like really right, get that game plan moving. Let's do one more playtest here. Keeping a 3-laner with Arcane Signet. There's Andoril, Radioactive Spiders. Remember, they can go get Miles. They could go get a couple other things, right? And then Flawless for the protection, as long as, as long as Miles or Ultimate Spider-Man's out. Here, I guess it's Arcane Signet. Here we go. We got 4 mana. And plus Andoril. Rampant means Miles next turn. Does that make the most sense? I guess I have no way to put... I was like, I don't have any way to put counters on everything just yet. So my thought is Ham plus Andoril. Now here I'm at 5 mana, 2 mana to equip, 3 mana to equip. Because we can go get the basic land. I could crack Radioactive Spider. What would I go get? So there's a couple of interesting options in the deck. You've got Miles Morales, obviously, that passes out the counters, right? Works really great with Ultimate in that sense. You have Ghost Spider, which can start slamming out the damage. Anti-Venom, right, for that big ability to grow itself with the counters whenever it gets damaged. Spider-Man getting that basic, or the Brooklyn Visionary for getting that basic land. I think I just kind of like Miles. Can spread the counters, right, so that they can get doubled. And then go to the next turn. Right, 6 for Miles, get the counters on. And then, ooh, and he joins up is an interesting proposition. 3 on the Miles, 4 for the and he joins up, deal out the damage, right? And then Miles attacks, putting a counter on each other creature you control. So that goes off twice. And then Andrew goes off for the City's Blessing, right, to put 2 counters on each creature. And now these guys get to attack. Miles gives that trample, so they both have trample, right? And then my thought is now this turn, we put Ultimated on the backside. Right, there's the 6 mana for that. And then it's going to attack. What we're going to do is we're going to have Andoril go off first to put 2 counters on all of them, right? Because whenever you attack and you have multiple abilities go on the stack, you get to choose what order you want them to go on. My thought is Andoril first to put the counters. Then I'm going to do Miles Morales, and his ability goes off twice. So 2 on Spider-Ham, 2 on Ultimate Spider-Man. Then Ultimate Spider-Man is going to go off twice. So 4 to 8 to 16. 9 to 18 to 36. Right. Now we're in... And then 5 to 10, 20. And you have the Flawless to back it up, and hopefully this just runs our opponents over, right? These guys both have trampled because of Miles' ability, and now, you're just hitting hard. Miles, Ultimate Spider-Man is 21 because of Spider-Ham's ability. Same thing as they all get the other 2 get +1 from Spider-Ham. But again, great. You can see where, Andoril plus these guys can really get out of hand if you can, get them all together and protect them. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Miles down in the comment section below? I have to say the one thing I really appreciate about some of these flip legends is they tried to put them into sub strategies where you have a lot of support. I think we see that a lot with Miles. We're going to see that with Peter at the end of the week with Legends. You see that with Gwen, like we talked about yesterday with Exiles Matter stuff. I think Miles is in a great position with counters. There's so much counter support, and there's going to continue to be more. So I'd love to know what you think of Miles, and I will catch you on